Hello, everyone. This is Rabbi Ari Sachs of Congregation Beth Mordechai coming to you with another edition of this week's online Parashah class. This week is Parashat Mishpatim, which is the Torah portion immediately following the giving of the Ten Commandments of Parashat Yitro. And here we have case law. We have situations in which certain rulings are made based upon issues that come up, especially having to do with who is liable for certain damages, whether that's having to do with an ox that leaves its own space and then goes into another space and ruins another person's crops or of their just of their property, and who is responsible. Also having to do in cases of capital punishment, in any case in which there is some question, some doubt as to who is to blame for what. And so here we get the judicial system that animates the people of Israel as they leave Egypt and they move into becoming their own people, and they to become their own nation. And you might expect that in any kind of conversation around what is right and what is wrong, you're going to have God be a part of the conversation. In other words, that what God says in many ways is the key element that animates the life, the ways of being that the Israelites of their lives. And that should be the case when it comes to law. So that in many ways, what the law says should reflect what God would want of the people. And though we are not living in a theocratic society, I do think that the idea of God in being the ultimate source of truth has a significant impact upon us. That is to say that when we go to when we bear witness at a courtroom, or when we take an oath of an office, often, though not always, often it is done with our hand placed upon a Bible and our other hand raised and saying that we will tell the truth and we will execute this office faithfully, and bringing God into this moment as that witness to the truth. What of this oath is really indicating to us that we need God to be there in order to tell the truth. And perhaps, as we're about to look in this week's Torah portion, that bringing God into this moment helps us know that what we're saying is truthful. And to begin that kind of conversation, I actually want to start not with a Torah source, no, a source from the Torah, but rather a source that speaks of this particular act of oath, of offering an oath in a court of law, to give us at least a sense as to God's role in the act of telling the truth. And so we're going to begin this week's class with looking at the 1865 edition of the Bouvier Law Dictionary. An oath: a declaration made according to law before a competent tribunal or officer to tell the truth, or it is the act of one who, when lawfully required to tell the truth, takes God to witness that what he says is true. It is a religious act by which the party invokes God not only to witness the truth and sincerity of his promise, but also to avenge his imposture or violated faith, or in other words, to punish his perjury if he shall be guilty of it. That idea of threat of punishment for not telling the truth is inherently embedded in the idea of bringing God into this moment of judging our truthfulness. Just as that there is a religious concept of God judging our actions, and especially around the high holidays in the Jewish calendar, that God is deciding whether or not we shall live or die based upon our actions, that God knowing what is the truth is the reason for us to tell the truth. meaning that we can't get past God, and therefore we rely upon God's presence to remind us to be truthful. As if to say that as human beings, we may struggle in actually wanting to tell the truth, especially if it doesn't serve our own self-interest. As such, we're going to take a look at a couple of passages that seem to indicate, well, the first one primarily, but that seem to indicate that God is present in this moment of truth-telling. And so we come to this week's Torah portion, specifically in this week's triennial portion, which is the middle section of the Torah portion. We are in Exodus chapter 22, verse 7. Im lo yimatzeh haganav. If a thief who has stolen from who has stolen property of owner, let's call him Sam, of Sam's property, when Sam was holding his property in the home of someone else, let's say her name was Deborah, so that if this thief stole Sam's property while it was on Deborah's property, v'nikrav ba'al habayit, and then the owner of that household who retained the possessions of the other, meaning that when Deborah is called, she comes El ha-Elohim, comes close to God, im lo shalach yado bimlechet re'ehu, that she has, or in my example, she, although it's written as he here, that she has not taken that which was in her, that which she was holding on to, that belonged to her neighbor, Meaning that if we do not know what the actual truth is, we do not find the thief who had stolen John's property when it was placed in Deborah's care, that we call upon Deborah to come El ha-Elohim, to come before God, in order to say that that she did not actually take John's property. So what that seems to be indicating is this moment of swearing before God. And in fact, there is an ancient Mesopotamian tradition, which may be the forebear to this tradition, that when one would want to tell the truth, one would take their idols, one would take their gods, and say, I swear upon these gods, I swear upon these idols, that the testimony I'm about to share is truthful. But there's one part of this that we're about to come up to which seems to indicate that maybe this use of the term Elohim as God may not be so straightforward. And as such, we have to then rethink what we mean when it says that this Baal Habayit, that this owner, comes before God. Al kol devar pesha. For every matter of trespass, al shor, al chamor, al set, al sama, al kol aveda, any transgression around people's property, people's possessions, people's flock, asher yomar, ki hu zeh ad ha-Elohim. I'm going to translate it over here. Whereof one saith, this is it, the cause of both parties shall come before God, which seems to be that they shall swear before God of what the truth is. But then here we have asher yavo devar shenehem asher yarshiun Elohim yeshalem shnayim l're'ehu, that he whom God shall condemn shall pay double unto his neighbor. That is to say that the second God here, if the first mention of God is shall come before God, we're talking about the second mention where it says, he whom God shall condemn shall pay double unto his neighbor, that this instance of the use of the term God seems to indicate that God is directly telling the plaintiffs or the people involved in this case what is the truth. Does that mean that there is a sign from heaven that comes down before God, that comes down before the people, that they should know what is the truth? Does that mean that there is a voice in their own heart that says, I know what the truth is? It potentially could be. But from the context, it seems to be some source that is described here as God or described as Elohim that indicates to these two individuals what the truth is. And the best way for us to understand what that role that God is playing here is as a judge. That God is ruling as a judge. And the fact that these individuals in this particular case in the Torah know what God is judging indicates, or I think is the reason for the following commentary from Rashi on the nature of this term Elohim. Apologize, just one moment. As I hit the wrong button. Here we are. Asher Yomar ki hu zeh. That when he says that this is it. Lefi pshuto, according to the plain meaning of the text. Asher Yomar ha'ed ki hu zeh. That when the witness comes and says this is it. Shenishbat alav hare hu etzlecha ad hadayanin. Yavo devar shenehem v'yachkeru et ha'edim. That is to say that he is coming to swear before a judge, ad hadayanin, and that before this judge, that the judge will then take what the words are of these two, and that he will research, he will delve into the testimony of the witness. Meaning, ki harehu eslecha ad hadayanin indicates that who is Elohim in this moment? It isn't God. It is the Dayanin. It is the human judges. That's to say that the term Elohim in this case does not mean God. It means human judges who in many ways are acting as gods in this moment. It reminds us a little bit of when God said to Moses that you will act as an Elohim, you will act as a God to Aaron. That it's not meaning that he is God, but it means that he has a power that is usually ascribed to God, which is to lead him and to make decisions for him in regards to how to deal with Pharaoh. And in this case, that judges have the power of God to determine what is truth. So that we place in the power of other human beings the ability to determine what is true and what is not true. And what I think is significant to that in regards to understanding what is truth is that if truth for a moment is our way of understanding what God, what truth is for us is the knowledge that God will know what is true and that we must abide by what God says, or perhaps fear of punishment, that we would ascribe that same power to another human being. Now, it may not be that we ascribe to another human being to punish us if we do not tell the truth. But I think that we can think of many times in our lives when we ascribe to someone else or when we offer to another person the ability to judge what is true and what is not true. When we say to our loved ones that you make the decision, I don't necessarily want to be a part of it, that we're giving them the power to determine what is true in that particular moment. Or, and I think another very important example, that when we are deciding what is true in any kind of given circumstance, could be where we should have dinner, it could be where we want to move as a family, it could be how we want to spend our Sunday. It doesn't really matter what the situation is, that in the conversation back and forth between two people, that when we hear the other person's perspective, we may change our perspective based upon their views. And as such, what we might consider to be the truth or to be what is right, which I think in this moment could be a synonym for truth, that when we think of as what is right is tailored by the opinions of another person. In other words, I think that the real emphasis of the term Elohim, not necessarily meaning God, but of being a human, is that our understanding of truth is tailored by the truths or the perspectives of other people. And as such, I wonder how often our truth is not a capital T truth which comes from God, but is a truth that comes from our relationship with other people. And that whether or not our truth really represents the right thing in that moment may depend actually upon the company we keep, as opposed to what is actually right or wrong. That leads, by the way, to the next understanding of Elohim. That if this term Elohim, which represents in a moment the God who we swear by to say that what we're about to say is truth, that perhaps this term Elohim represents something that may not actually be truthful. And so we turn now back to our text to a second instance of the term Elohim. This is in verse 19. Zoveach la Elohim Yochoram bilti ladonai levado. Zoveach la Elohim Yochoram bilti ladonai levado. That sacrifices to Elohim, however we wanted to define it, is shall be destroyed. Bilti ladonai levado, but only to God, to the Lord our God, to the Lord God, God's self, will these sacrifices be received. Meaning that the term Elohim is compared negatively in this case to the term Adonai, which is one of the ways in which we also say the word God, or the name of God. And so, because of this comparison between Elohim and Adonai, Elohim in a negative sense, Adonai in a positive sense, then we have Rashi, who comments on the verse, and the comments in a second. La Elohim la avodah zara. That this term Elohim refers to idolatry, to idol worship, meaning that the term Elohim refers to gods who are false. So think about it this way. If the term Elohim, which referred at first seemingly to us being able to know by God what the truth is, that in fact, if we do swear by Elohim, we could come up with two other instances, which is Elohim as human beings, as these judges who make decisions. And by the way, if we know anything about the history of law, and especially the history of judges, that we go through periods we go through periods in history in which judges judge fairly and judges judge partially, and perhaps are become corrupted because of the fact that they're human beings. And so as human beings, we may have an ability to understand what is true, but we also have an ability to act out of our own self-interest and to act falsely and to not act out of that sense of what is true. And that seems to be part of that second meaning of Elohim, which is these false gods. That it is possible to look for what we believe to be true, for what we believe to be God, and to falsely understand what is true, to actually serve a purpose that is wrong, that is false, that is evil. And in many ways, I think this reflects the challenges the challenges of terrorism that exist in the world. Meaning that when people act in a way because they believe it to be true, they believe they are following a particular understanding of God. Yes, they may be following a particular understanding, but that doesn't mean that understanding is true. That it may actually be false. And that for us, we need to be careful. We're not supposed to follow those Elohim. We're supposed to follow Adonai. And to be very careful in understanding that in trying to follow Adonai, we may go astray and follow Elohim. We may go astray and follow those false gods. And so we have to be careful when we're thinking about what is true and what is right, to not be so sanctimonious and righteous, because it's possible that we may be going down the wrong path. And to always try to keep in our hearts that we are following God's path, that we are following Adonai's path, which leads to the final instance of Elohim in this text, or in this chapter, which is at the very end of the chapter. Verse 27. Elohim lo tikalel. Thou shalt not revile God, v'nasi ve'amecha lo ta'or, nor curse a ruler of thy people. Now, given the juxtaposition of nasi, of someone who is a person, who is a ruler, with the term Elohim, we may think that this term Elohim harkens back to that first explanation that Elohim refers to a judge, to another human being. But as Rashi says here, Elohim lo tekalel, harezo azhara levirchat Hashem. That when it says that you shall not revile God, it is a warning to not curse God's name. Meaning, in this case, he's understanding Elohim to refer to Elohim as Adonai. And so when we take that oath, whether it's as a witness or whether it's to ourselves when we're having a conversation to someone, when we take that oath to ourselves to tell the truth, we may be taking it to, we may be making that oath to, based upon the truth of the person who's sitting across from us, that we're trying to reflect what they're saying and to understand their truth, or we may be, or we may actually be impacted in a negative way by the way in which someone else understands the truth. And to understand that when we're dealing with human beings, that it is difficult to know what is right and what is wrong. And so we have to be very considerate and very open to the different possibilities of what truth can be like when we're working with another person. Or we are aware of all of the different permutations of what truth can be like, and we either knowingly or unknowingly choose to go down the wrong path, choose to follow that path, which is that false sense of truth, just like those false gods. And so we may be, and we may have a good heart, we may have good intentions to be able to do what is right. But for whatever reason, whether it's because of the person sitting across from us, because of some act of self-interest, because of whatever it may be, we may rationalize that we are following a true and righteous way, but in the heart of our hearts, we know that we're following a false God. And so whether we're dealing with another person, whether we're dealing with an idea, whether we're dealing with something inside of ourselves, that we must be careful. We must be aware of those ways in which we think we are distilling the truth, but that our hearts may be going in a different path. And to always, in whatever situation we come across, to try in our own way to be able to believe, to be able to follow the word that is true, to be able to see what is God trying to tell me in this moment, what inspiration is in my heart that I believe comes from God, knowing that there are paths that will lead us astray, and knowing that we may not be able to fully understand what is put before us, but as best as possible, to be able to share the truth, that when we share it, we have that sense that we have put forward our best selves. And so my hope is that in whatever way that we can, to follow the truth from God, whether that is distilled by another person, whether that comes from the deepest recesses of our hearts, knowing full well that there may be times in which we are led astray without even knowing it, but to always come back to a truth that lies within, to that spark of divinity embedded within all human beings, that if we listen closely to it, to that still small voice, then maybe that truth has always been there for us to discover. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this week's class. Take care. Shabbat shalom, and see you next week. Bye-bye.